Hi everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Antje and today I'll be talking about The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. And this story focuses on the AIDS epidemic in Chicago in the 1980s, and we're following Yale, who works in a gallery and just sees his community falling apart, everyone slowly getting sick and dying whilst he is just trying to keep it together. There's also a second timeline where we are following Fiona, who was a friend of Yale's and an ally to the gay community in the 1980s, 30 years later, so in 2015, when she is in Paris looking for her daughter who's gone missing. I can say straight away that this timeline was just a waste of papers. I did not connect to Fiona in that part of the story at all, even though she was such a likable character in Yale's timeline. And it was just a waste of pages because nothing happened, there was no development, plus there was no real connection to the first storyline, so I don't know why it was included. If this part of the book had not been there, this would have been a 5-star read, but as it was, Fiona's timeline, I really bumped it down to 4 stars, and I really don't have that much to say about it just because I couldn't have cared less. Anyway, back to Yale's storyline. What I really enjoyed about The Great Believers was Rebecca Makkai's writing style. It is very subtle and subordinates itself to the story. And to explain what I mean by that, let's look at the beginning of The Great Believers. It starts off with Yale and his boyfriend Charlie visiting a funeral of their friend Nico's. Nico died of AIDS, and whilst this was a funeral and it was a sad scene, I found myself thinking, oh well, I don't know these characters, what do I care? Shortly after that we see all the relationship problems Yale and Charlie are having, and again I thought, well, this is kind of shitty, but what do I care? And I was reading this book in multiple chunks, so about 20 to 40 pages at a time, and then putting it to the side, doing other stuff, and I found myself at some point picking up a book and realizing how much I cared about these characters. There wasn't a certain event that suddenly made me love the characters, it just happened organically that I was reading this book and I felt this love for Yale, but also for all his friends, even though we'd only read 1 or 2 sentences about his friends and it was more telling than showing, due to Rebecca Makkai building such a deep relationship with Yale. You as a reader felt like his friends were also your friends, and I think it really takes a great author to manage that and just put her characters and her story into the foreground and just using her writing as a tool to make this happen. And another example as to why Rebecca Makkai's writing style is so good, as I mentioned before, Yale works in a gallery. Again, that was a storyline I didn't care that much for, but it leads up to this huge plot twist, or well, to this twist in the story anyway. And normally this would have been a scene where I would have put the book down or looked up and said, oh shit. But in this case, even though it was such a twist, I was so invested in Yale that instead of thinking of myself as a reader and how I as a reader feel about the scene, I felt the same emotions as Yale did in that moment when he witnesses or takes part in this twist. And I felt his emotions, I thought about his feelings, I thought about his future, instead of, well, how it impacts me as someone sitting in front of a book reading his story. And it was only when I finished the book that I really had time to think about how big this plot twist was, because before that I was just so in the story that it happened to me just as much as it happened to Yale. And The Great Believers is such a heartbreaking book because you have this LGBTQ sub-community in Chicago, and these are people who can finally own up to their sexuality and enjoy their sexuality. For many, it's the first time that they were able to live in the open this way. And just when this whole community is blooming and finding its place in society, AIDS comes and destroys everything. And through Yale's perspective, we see just how everyone in this community is scared, how it's slowly closing itself off and just losing its vibrancy and its life power, because everyone kind of knows or expects that they'll get infected because the virus is just everywhere. And we see the friendships during this time, how they develop, and just how the community grows together and tries to support those who are sick, and also get officials and the health system to help them. And it also shows just what misinformation was also flying around within the community at that point, and it makes you understand how this epidemic could become so big as it was, and why you can't really put blame on anyone for getting infected just because no one really knew what was going on. And it was just, looking back with the knowledge I have now, I'm just getting goosebumps. It was horrible, and it was sad. And this book just tackles such a heavy subject, and Rebecca Makkai could have taken this whole AIDS epidemic and made a shit show out of it, just taking all the suffering and pain and drawing it out, really mistreating her characters. But instead she focuses on the friendships, she focuses on this community of them all just sticking together. And I really liked that she focused on the positive aspects and just this theme of people holding each other up and together. And I think it was a really respectful way of doing it, and a very, very classy way of doing it, even though of course I'm not part of a community, so I can't really judge it. But as an outsider, I would say it was very, very well done. I'm quite surprised that I haven't heard more about this book, just because it is such a sad story. It is really well written, and it tackles an issue that I haven't read about yet before, and I don't think that is tackled a lot in literature. And normally I think this would have been a book that booktubers all over, which I just don't understand why it hasn't gotten more hype, because it deserves more love, it deserves more attention, it deserves more hype. Definitely underrated. I highly recommend this book. Trigger warnings for AIDS and people dying of AIDS, though I have to mention that the death and the suffering isn't really center point to this book, so you don't have any long drawn out scenes of people dying or anything like that, but still be warned. Apart from that, I think this is a book that everyone can enjoy. Well, not enjoy, but maybe immerse themselves in. And I think just the writing, the characters, everything makes it a great book. Anyway, that was it about The Great Believers. This was my review. I'll see you next week, and bye!